So I've been working on my Anvil44 scenario. In fact, I'm almost finished with it. And what you see here is the result of a fairly historical Allied landing in the south of France. Not that it's necessary for the Allies to land in the historical manner, uh, but it makes sense for this demonstration. So we can see that they've landed over here. They've taken Caen. They're threatening Nice. On this side, French forces have taken Toulon. Um, they're threatening Marseille. Combat motorized units, this would be the equivalent of the American Task Force Butler, has managed to move this far up. And over here we have some French tanks that have cut off Marseille. So all that is just kind of a fairly normal happening in the August 2, 1944 Allied landing and the immediately following Allied player turn, if you choose to do the historical landings. And what we've come to now is the September 1, 1944 game turn, and this is the Axis player turn. This is the first time the Axis player has had the opportunity to react to the Allied invasion. Because it's a fairly historical situation, over here the Axis player, there's some German units and also some Italian units from the Italo-German Army of Liguria. They'll have to decide about defending the border here. They'll need to think about some of these passes through the high Alps, either defending those or even possibly figuring out how to launch an attack against this fairly weak equivalent of Task Force Butler here. Just some ants, really, is all that is. Over here, it looks like Marseille is probably doomed to fall in the next Allied player turn. And meanwhile, all these German units here need to start thinking about either launching a counterattack in this direction into here, although that's probably not going to be possible, or at least they need to think about blocking the retreat route, or I should say blocking the Allies from getting into the German retreat route up the valley of the Rhone here. That's just all fairly typical if you're playing in a historical fashion as opposed to Allied landings happening over here or directly against Marseille or Toulon, which are a little bit dangerous, but you can try that. But the main thing I want to talk about in this demo is the depot and supply situation. In my Sea Lion 40 scenario, I followed the basic rules from their finest hour, and as a consequence, the German player was required to use depots and supplies to supply amphibious forces landing on the coast of England. Now, in their finest hour and in my scenario, the British player doesn't need to use depots. He uses what's pretty much the standard supply system of just tracing back to a city or whatever as a supply source. Okay, so that, as in TFH, that worked out pretty well in my Sea Lion scenario. I made a few modifications to it with an eye toward thinking about expanding that depot supply system for both players in some other scenarios. And in fact, that's what I've implemented here. So the Allies definitely need to bring their supplies ashore, and they need to have supply depots, and their units need to trace their supply lines back to supply depots. And that makes sense because it's an amphibious invasion. But what I've done is I've gone ahead and on an experimental basis, I've implemented a very similar, in fact, I'd say identical supply system for the Germans. The only difference is they don't need to bring their supplies in and land them at the coast to build their depots. They have a number of depots already stockpiled with supplies in play, and they need to pay a certain amount of attention, not a whole lot, but a certain amount of attention to where their supplies are stockpiled in which depots in order to keep their units in supply. So they're not tracing supply lines to the typical rail lines at the edge of the map or cities that serve as supply sources. They're actually tracing to depots that have supplies in them. Each individual unit needs to be assigned to a particular depot. If that depot runs out of supplies and the unit is out of supplies, even if it could, in theory, trace a supply line to a different depot that has supplies, it will be up to the individual player to say, hey, I want these units to trace to this depot and these units to trace to that depot. Now, for the Allies in particular, it's pretty easy because once they take Marseille, and maybe even Toulon will work, they can just have that one single depot and all their units can trace to it and they don't have to worry about it too much. The Germans, on the other hand, as they're backpedaling, have to worry about where they're going to get their supplies from. Although they should have plenty of them, they have to think about where they're going to get them from. And they also have to think about not allowing the Allies to capture supplies as they advance. So to start out, for the Germans, if we look and say, where are the depots? And we'll run down here and say, show me all the depots. Because we have limited intelligence turned off at the moment, we can see not only German depots, which are marked in red. Let me hide this for a second. So we have a couple depots over here in Italy for the Army of Liguria. So not only do we have the German depots shown in red, but we have the Allied depots shown in green. The Allies have depot over here in Toulon because when they captured Toulon, they also captured some German supplies that had been stockpiled there. All right, so now that we know where the depots are, the next thing that we want to do, and let's hide those, and let's click on a hex, and we know there's a depot in here. So we'll click on that, and because there's a friendly depot in that hex, we have here a link to the depot menu. And if I click on that, that puts us in what I call depot mode. And all that means is for the moment, you can't click on a unit to move it. Any kind of clicking that we're doing while we're in depot mode, that is while we're looking at the depot menu, will have to do with the supply situation rather than with movement of units. But anytime we want, we can exit this and just get back to regular movement. So we can just quickly go back and forth whenever we feel like doing it. So starting out, we can see what hex we're in. That's just the usual information that we show. Okay, where was I before the dog interrupted me? I think I was explaining the depot menu. So we can see this is the depot in Lyon. It has 24 supply points in there. It has 3 REs assigned to the depot. We can see our total number of supply points throughout the friendly depots and the total number of REs that are assigned to those depots. And at the moment, there are no REs that are unassigned to depots. That's a good thing because generally you want your units assigned to depots. And we do have 40 supply points that have newly arrived this turn, and they can be distributed to depots as we see fit. So here's some of the options that are available. We can show all friendly depots, and I think we kind of did that a minute ago, except in this case, we get extra information we can see for each depot. We're only seeing friendly depots this time. For each depot, we can see the number of supply points and the number of REs assigned to the depot. We can come back here. For the depot that's selected, in this case Lyon, we can show all the headquarters that have 1 or more units assigned to the depot. So when we look here, these 2 just popped up. So there are units there and there are units here assigned to that depot. If we want, we can generate a full report of depots, supplies, and units. That takes just a second. It pops up, and this looks, let me pull it down here a little bit. This looks kind of like an order of battle, and because limited intelligence is turned off, it shows both the Allied and the Axis supply situation. Excuse me. So we can see totals, we can see information for each individual depot, and then we can see all the depots about exactly which units are assigned to which depot and so on. We don't really need to look at this too often, but anytime you want, that report can be generated if you want to be the quartermaster and think about where all the shoes and candy bars and stuff are stored. So other things we can do, we can create a new depot anytime we want. Depots are free. It costs nothing. You can have as many as you want, although you don't want to have too many. You want to have just whatever is necessary. You can create a depot just about any place. I think not in mountains or swamps unless they contain roads or railroads, but just about anywhere you want. But normally you want to create them on a railroad because it's a whole lot easier to get stockpiles of supplies into a depot if it's on a railroad. And so we'll just, for the heck of it, there's no real reason to do this. I'm going to say that we want to create a new depot. It shows us the ones we already have. And I'm going to put a depot right here. It's kind of a dumb place to have a depot, but now we have another one. And if I say show all friendly depots, then sure enough, there it is. No units there, but there's a depot. The next thing we can think about is distributing all those newly arriving supply points. You remember we saw up here 40 fresh supply points. So let's distribute those. If we click here, again, it shows us all the depots on the map. It lists them here, and then we can drop supplies into them. These numbers don't really matter. I think Marseille is probably actually cut off. We'll put this in here. We'll put some in there. We'll put some in there. All right, so we can distribute them as we see fit. And it says, okay, that worked. That's only because verbose mode is turned on. If we turn off verbose mode, it will put up some of those kinds of messages. So now we've got extra supply points as necessary in various depots around the place. One thing I want to show while we're talking about that is you can undo just about all those actions, and you might say, oh my gosh, I didn't really want to put 5 supply points into I don't know, into Nice. I didn't want to do that. So let's undo that. And now they're taken away from Nice and they go back into the pool for distribution this turn. You can also do things like, remember I created that new depot, which is kind of silly, and I could uncreate that if I wanted to. Sometimes you'll find that you have to do things in the right sequence. Otherwise, it won't allow you to undo something if you have done something else in the meantime that would mess it up. Okay, so we distributed some supplies. Distributing newly arrived supplies is rather like tracing supply lines in a standard supply system in that it doesn't cost you any rail cap as long as you have a clean rail line from the edge of the map or wherever to the depot. Then you can just drop them in the depot. Now, on the other hand, there might be times when you want to transfer supply points by rail from one depot to another. That will cost rail cap. The Access player has a minimal amount of rail cap in this scenario, but we could say move supply points by rail from this depot, Lyon is the one that's selected, from this depot to another one, or move them by rail from another depot to this one. So we could get them to Lyon. So let's just say that we want to move some supply points by rail from this depot to that brand new one that I created here. Oh, by the way, this brings up showing the rail net. So we can see green is the German rail net. The Allies have captured some of the rail net here and in here. And these are broken here. So they can't be used for normal rail movement of supplies or units, although keep in mind that per the raw rules, it doesn't matter if the rail hex is broken when you're essentially distributing supplies that are newly arrived, so when you're tracing supply lines on rail. Anyway, we'll take a few supply points and send them over to this new depot from Lyon. How many? Well, we'll send 5. It doesn't matter. So we'll click here to move those. So it just confirms that that worked. And now, if we check, we'll see that Lyon has gone down by 5, and this new depot here has gone up by 5. Now remember that units need to, each individual unit needs to be assigned to a depot. They can be reassigned, and you can do that in a variety of ways. You can do it on this depot menu. You can do it, as we'll see in a minute, at the core level for all when you're moving units. You can say, oh yeah, by the way, I want other units in this core to transfer to another depot. Or while you're moving units, you can do them individually. You can say, I want this individual unit to be transferred from one depot to another depot, and we'll see some of that in a minute. So here we could say transfer all the units from this depot to another depot. That doesn't move the units anywhere. That doesn't put them in a different headquarters. It just says that they will need to draw their supply from a different depot. So let's say that we're going to assign all the ones from this depot to that newly created depot that's next door. Again, there's no reason to do this. It's just an example of how it works. So we'll transfer those, and we'll click here to reassign, and it's telling us that we reassigned the units from this depot to this depot. There were 2 units, and it counts as 3 REs because that's really how we determine supply, keeping in mind that combat motorized units and cavalry units, their REs are doubled for supply purposes. So we close that, and we come back up here, and if now, for example, we were say show all friendly supply depots, and we look at Lyon on here, REs assigned is 0, and we look at 4431, now it has the 3 because we reassigned for supply purposes the units from Lyon to the other one. So we go back to the menu, and if we say, oh, that was a silly idea, I don't know why I did that, then we can undo it. And here this tells us, okay, yeah, you're not at 4431 anymore. These guys went back to being assigned to Lyon. I'm going to go back here. We can say that we want to show headquarters with units not assigned to any depot. In general, that's a bad thing because almost invariably you will want each unit to be assigned to a depot. So if we click on that, I'm going to say, well, we didn't find any because that hasn't happened yet. If it found any, then it would dot the hex to say somewhere in this hex there's a unit that is not assigned to a depot. We can say we want to assign all the units from a selected headquarters to this depot. And again, this doesn't move the unit. This doesn't put the unit in a different headquarters. It just says it's drawing supply from a different depot. So if we click here, and we could say we want units here to draw their supply from Lyon. And of course, that covered all the units that are in that hex, although I think there's only one in there right now. So let's go, and I could keep doing that if I wanted to assign more units there. We'll go back to the depot menu, and we'll see about undoing that. Yeah, so here we assigned all the units in German 4th Infantry Corps to Lyon, and we're going to say, no, I want to undo that. So we click on it. It just puts them back to their original depot assignment. We go back to the menu here. We can assign all friendly units in play to this depot, to Lyon. That's not a very common thing, but once in a while you want to do that. And in fact, in this scenario, um, probably next turn, when the Allies are ready, they'll probably say, I'm going to make Marseille my main supply depot. And even though there several others have been created along the way, uh, probably all units will get assigned to Marseille, and then you'll just be able to do it in one fell swoop by clicking on that one thing. I won't do that right now. Now you can also destroy depots and or some or all of the supplies in the depot. Now remember, the Allies landed here, captured Toulon, and when they did so, they got a bunch of German supplies. You get a percentage depending on how that goes. It looks like Marseille is probably doomed, and it looks like the Allies are going to take it in the next player turn. So there's no sense in leaving a lot of supplies in there with the chance that the Allies will capture a significant proportion of them. So we could say, let's go in here and destroy some of this stuff. And in this case, we don't want to destroy them in Lyon. We want to go to Marseille, and we can say, how many do we want to destroy? So right now, there are 39 in there. It's we have 4.5 REs assigned to that depot, and maybe we want them to be in supply at the beginning of next turn. Maybe they will last a little bit longer. So we'll just say that of that 39, let's destroy 34 of them. And if we destroyed all of them, it would get rid of all the supplies, and it would get rid of the depot itself, which really doesn't matter too much, but it would get rid of that depot. But for now, we're just going to be decrementing the number of supply points in the depot. So we'll click here to destroy it, and there we go. So it leaves 5 supply points, and that's adequate for one player turn for the REs that are assigned to that depot. And again, we could undo that if we wanted to. If we said, oh no, that was a mistake, it would be just as easy to go in here and undo it, but we'll leave that as is. So that's the main stuff that can be done in what I'm calling depot mode through the depot menu. You don't really have to mess with it all that often. I've spent probably more time discussing this than you would normally do it, more time than you expend working on supplies throughout this entire scenario. But seems to work pretty well. I'm pretty happy with it. It's still experimental. I might just say, oh, never mind, and I can easily disconnect it and just go back to regular supply mode for the Germans. Although I think the Allies will need to continue doing this because it seems to make sense when you conduct an amphibious landing to be able to bring supplies over by transport, put them in depots, and then trace supply lines to that depot. So let's get out of the menu and out of depot mode and just show a couple of extra things that go along with this. So I mentioned that we could get into the core level, and if I go here, I can do a couple things. I can load each unmoved unit in the headquarters with supplies, so each unit will be able to carry some supply. So in order to do that, and the reason we're seeing it here is because the unit has to start the player turn in the hex with supplies, and it can't expend movement points for anything else. It will cost 1 movement point to actually load the supplies. For most units, it's up to double its RE size. For combat motorized units, it's up to 4 times their RE size. So we could do that. We could also transfer all the units in the 10th Corps to another depot. Remember, we did a similar thing, almost identical, via the depot menu, and this is just another way to get to doing the same thing. Sometimes it's easier during movement to click over and do so. We'll cancel and get back here. We can also go into this any individual unit. In this case, there's only 1 unit in the core, so it doesn't matter too much. We'll come over here and click on Depot and Supply, and it tells us here, for example, maximum supply points this unit can carry is 2. So we'll go ahead, we'll give it 2 supply points to carry around. It'll cost an MP to do that. We'll load it. Tells us it worked. Again, if we turn off verbose mode, we won't have to see those messages. We look here and we can see that we expended 1 MP. That's the standard thing. And we've added this new little symbol here. And when we hover over that, it says, oh yeah, you're carrying 2 supply points. Now we could also go in, maybe we want to move over to here. And we could say, let me get this a click. We could say that maybe we want to unload the supplies from this unit. And if we do that, we unload that and we get ourselves a new depot, because wherever supplies are, that's where a depot is. We could also undo all that if we wanted to. And if the unit goes back, or let's cancel the move, cancel the unit move. Whoops. If I were to go in and do that correctly, then it would pick up those supplies and put them back where they came from along with the unit. Now if I cancel this guy, let's get out of here and let's go up here. We could see who's carrying supplies. So we would look here, units carrying supplies, and at this point nobody is, because he dropped his supplies in that hex. If we go back here, and we would be able to pick them up again, although that doesn't seem to be working right now. I'll have to take a look at that and see what's going on. So we'll click and cancel this. In any event, so you can carry supplies around, drop them off where you want to. So it seems like a big confusing addition to the system, but in fact, in playtesting, it actually seems to be pretty smooth. You don't have to mess with it all that much, and it seems to add quite a bit to what's going on. If nothing else, depots make a great objective for enemy attacks. So capturing supplies is always a good thing. Depriving the enemy of supplies is always a great thing. So anyway, that's just a brief, I hope brief, excursion into my very much experimental depot and supply rules that I have now expanded for Anvil44, not just for the amphibious player, the allies, but also the player that's not amphibious, so already on the continent with continental style railroads and supplies. And it seems to work pretty well. Yet to be seen, though, if I will actually continue to implement this or give up and go back to regular stuff. Anyway, thanks for listening. Check out the link for more information on this stuff.